If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is the creepiest thing you've seen in the small towns, remote or rural areas? Me and a friend decided to take our 4x4s and go camping in the mountains. I wake up middle of the night because I need to take a piss. So I put on my headlamp and I walk a bit further from camp, and as I'm doing my business, I hear rocks ruffle behind me as if they're being walked on. Anxiety rises. I finish up and turn around, and as my headlamp faintly lights up the area around me, all I see eyes, about 20 of them, and just staring at me. My breathing stops. And I literally freeze where I'm standing. And then I hear a Ma AAA goat blessed. It was a ducking herd of mountain goats that were intrigued by the ape in their backyard. Almost gave me an aneurysm. This is probably less scary than a lot of the other posts, but I was pretty sure I was going to be the nameless victim at the start of a horror movie to show how dangerous the monster is. Basically, my dad and I were walking through the woods when we came across a young moose leg lying on the ground. It looked like it had been violently torn off with no sign of the rest of the moose anywhere. It was fresh with blood still on the wound, probably no more than a couple hours old. My dad is a pretty skilled hunter, so he handed me his axe that he was carrying and told me to watch for wolves while he started looking for tracks. After a little bit he came back saying, "That's weird, normally if it was wolves you'd be able to find paw prints, but I can't see any. Also no bear prints, so I have no idea what killed this." And so I'm like, "You didn't find any tracks at all?" And his very reassuring response was, "Well, I did find what appears to be the mama moose tracks headed this way, showing me the tracks. You can see how her stride is a lot longer here. Whatever killed her baby, she didn't want to fight it, she just took off running." He then pulls out his bear spray and holds it at the ready as we kept walking deeper into the woods with the UN-named non-track leaving predator armed with bear spray and an axe. This took place in the Australian bush around 10-11 at night. I was 17, leading a staggered column of about 60 cadets to our detachment campsite. Due to light discipline rules, only myself at the very front of the group and the other flight commander at the rear had torches on. This was so that any vehicles coming along the trail could see us, and so that most of the cadets could maintain their night vision. We were camouflaged up and thus difficult to see at night. As we walked along, I periodically looked to my sides, and kept seeing what looked like dewdrops on the ground. Almost like tiny blue gems glinting in my torchlight either side of the road. I had to maintain my position in the formation, so I couldn't get a good look at what they were. However, after a while we stopped for a very brief break, and I took the opportunity to have a closer look. Walking over to the side of the trail, I spotted a small cluster of the diamonds and focused my head torch on them. Rather than seeing diamonds or dewdrops or anything remotely pleasant, I instead saw a group of about 5 large spiders just crouching in the leaf litter and staring at me. They looked like huntsmen's, which are about the size of an adult's hand. Sweeping my head around, I realized there were thousands of the things. All over the ground, some on the trunks of trees, and everywhere around me, glaring at the light affixed to my head. I had a very brisk walk back to the formation and attempted to play it cool while screaming in my head. Being a massive arachnophobe, I have no ducking clue how I managed to set up a tent and spend the next week in that cursed forest. I was in a large wooded area near my BF's home, with him, hanging out nearly at midnight. We had gone in pretty deep and it required a good amount of climbing. The closest path was maybe 5 to 7 minutes climbing down, so it was highly unlikely someone could be at that spot, that time of the night, besides us. As we were kissing and stuff, he thought he saw a shadow move 20 to 25 feet to the left of us, climbing, but it stopped suddenly when my BF looked at it. He told me to be wary. In that exact moment we saw a dark figure climbing a little up but diagonally, like he tried to go directly above where we were. We didn't move and watch him till he closed the horizontal gap and was directly above us, maybe 15 feet of steep downhill thick forest. Then he began to come towards us. Without skipping a bit, my BF grabbed my hand and we almost ran downhill till the path. We made it in less than 2 minutes while still holding hands and listening to the man running behind us. We ran as fast as we could down the path and out of the forest, where there was a cafe and some basketball and tennis courts next to the wooded hill, and of course, people. As we realized we came really close to be mugged or worse, we vowed never to go there at night again. I was Boy Scout, camping with my group of older buddies and an adult leader in Yellowstone. We had been backpacking for 2 days and stopped in a beautiful little clearing at the bottom of some huge tree-covered hills. The sun started to set, we made a fire, and I began to climb up into the trees to dig a hole and fill it back up. You know what I mean. As I squat there, basking in moonlight and appreciating the glow of fire among the trees, I looked up to a ridgeline a few hundred yards away where the moon was rising, and I shit you not, I saw a damn big cougar crest the hill and just watch our fire. It was likely no danger to me, but seeing that outline, that unmistakable shoulder crawl they do, was haunting. I watched it sit there for a good 15 minutes until I was called back by my worried buds. I pointed the cat out at them when I got done because it was still just watching us. Crazy. In Auburn, Alabama in 2008. It was Halloween and we Googled haunted houses. I can't remember what the website was like or if there even was one, but it was like 45 minutes away. I know that it wasn't like a big attraction and we figured it was on someone's land and would be like a local deal. We drove out there at like 10 p.m. This was before iPhones and GPS, so we had MapQuest directions. We ended up going down a pretty country road for a while with no street lights, then turned down a legit dirt road that went through the woods. Pitch black. Went down it for like 10 minutes and finally saw an old house with a sign by the driveway that was handwritten and said haunted house. No other cars or lights or people anywhere. We pulled in the driveway and sat there for a second like alright, this is ducked up, we should leave. All of the sudden an old pickup truck turned on about 15 feet in front of us facing us, lights shining right in our faces. It started driving towards us, down their own driveway. We backed out and peeled out. It followed us, like almost bumping our rear end. Right on our tail down this pitch black dirt road in the middle of the Alabama woods. We were flipping our shit. It was Texas Chainsaw Massacre / Hills Have Eyes stuff. He stayed out our tail blinding us and almost bumping us all the way back home until we got off our exit and he finally let us go. No idea who was driving. I always think what would have happened if we got out of the car when we were in that driveway. Okay, so one time back when I was like 11, me and my friend were walking through the woods because he said he had something he wanted to show me. We walked down the path for a good 20 minutes until he suddenly started walking through some closely planted thin trees. Despite my confusion, I followed him until he suddenly stopped in a clearing and there was a round mud hut in front of us. He told me he was too scared to go inside, so I did instead. The floor was lower down than the floor itself and there was a little fire put in the center. It was surrounded by DIY wooden bench things. Although that was odd in itself, the real showstopper were the walls. Every inch of the mud walls were covered in animal skulls held up by wire. These would range from a small sparrow skull to a deer skull. It was a pretty neat sight TBF. Outside of the hut was another small bench which had the phrase "where heaven and earth meet" carved into it. Cut to January of this year and me and my mum tried to find the weird voodoo hut again in the woods. While we did come across the hut, it had sadly been demolished and all but a few of the skulls had been taken. It just kinda looked like someone had jumped on top of it after stealing all of the skulls for the what I can only imagine to be some vulture culture collection. It's kinda sad it had to go, but I still remember like it was yesterday. Was a high schooler mid-90s. Went fishing off the coast of Corpus Christi with uncle and cousins. We were about 18 miles out. Been out all day. Was around 8 p.m. and we're gearing up to head back in. It was before DST, so sun was already going down and getting dark. I was at the stern bringing in the traps. As I'm pulling it in, I see this glow about 100 to 150 feet off. It's nothing I have ever seen. Best way I can describe it. It's like if you stuck a toaster underwater and the orange glowing elements were still working. But still not quite. And it was very large. We were on a 38 feet boat. All I can guess it was 5 to 6 times bigger. Kind of hard to judge sizes on open water. The water above it is not churning, but you can tell that it is disturbing it. IDK hard to explain. Almost like it was pushing the water up. This whole time I'm expecting something to break the surface and just frozen. You know, like when you're walking the dog or something at night not really paying attention and a cat or possum runs out. How you freeze and everything stops. I'm like that the whole time. Finally I let out a call to my uncle. He comes around, stops right by me. He's not saying anything, just kind of like me. This thing, object or whatever the hell, just jets out towards the Gulf. I'm talking like not picking up speed. Instantly jets out. All I say is, "You seen that before?" My uncle just says, "Nope, let's go." I say absolutely nothing the way back and he doesn't either. My cousins ask us what happened. All my uncle says is nothing. Now what could it have been? I've researched it on and off for past 25 years. Especially when the internet came out. I've found a lot of people seeing something very similar. There is a naval base down there, but no sub bases we know about. It kind of took over my life for a lot of years. If we have something like that though, we've been holding out on technology that could change our lives. I was delivering a sailboat from San Diego to Morro Bay, California, roughly 25 miles offshore alone. At around 1 a.m., about 36 hours into the trip, I saw a bright glowing blue orb around 30 feet in diameter just below the surface at my 1 o'clock. It was a moonless night, which made the blurry sphere contrast well against the seemingly black water around it. My first thought was, oh shit, a fast attack submarine is surfacing, not uncommon in that area. I started desperately looking for a yellow flare in the water, maritime warning for a soon-to-be surfacing sub, but couldn't find one. It fluctuated in size and moved very slowly, so I quickly ditched the submarine theory. After some time I ended up idling and put the boat into irons to just watch it for a while. When it finally broke the surface in a large, bright, and loud boil, I realized what I had been watching. Turns out it was a large school of sardines swimming together, agitating the bioluminescence that happened to be present that night. It still stands out as one of the most bizarre experiences I've had on the water, and I will never forget it. I was probably about 14 or so on a camping trip with my scout troop out in the middle of nowhere. Literally hiked into the woods for about 40 miles and set up camp. No phones, no way of contacting the outside, just us and some of our parents fishing and hiking, etc. Anyway, second night into the trip, my dad, myself, and 2 other parents are sitting around the campfire talking and get on the subject of UFOs. We start talking about different stories we'd seen on TV shows and such. Right in the middle of a story, my friend's dad points up at the sky and goes, "Holy shit, what's that?" We thought he was joking around for a good minute till he goes, "Seriously, turn around, Therese Moore." We all turn around finally and see 3 massive, and I mean ducking massive fireballs screaming down from the sky towards the earth. They look like they're going in slow motion, or maybe time just seemed to slow down, but it took forever for them to disappear behind the tree line. Naturally, we're all freaked the duck out and started talking about what it could be, but Therese no way of finding out for at least 3 more days. The hike out of the woods was the worst. Just walking quietly, contemplating what could be waiting and what the world might be like if our worst fears happened while we were in there. Turns out a Russian satellite had broken up and fallen to Earth that night, and it was seen for miles and miles. Still the creepiest 3 days of my life. Small town in a relatively rural area. A few years after the fact, I'm now relatively certain it was a skinwalker. About 10 years ago, I was at my dad's house for the weekend in Kentucky. The Appalachian people are very superstitious, hailing from the Scots-Irish people and just never losing that side of them. My dad wasn't superstitious, I thought, and was not one to be easily scared. It was about, 10 at night, and we randomly decided to go into town to get some McDonald's. Daddy always insisted on walking in front of me, and I always assumed it was so I wouldn't accidentally step on a snake, but now I don't think that's the case. So, he turned on the porch light and opened the screen door. He had put 1 foot on the porch and there was this god-awful sound. I will never in my life forget it. There was a screech followed by the sound of a crow. But it wasn't a crow. The best way I can describe it is if a person was mimicking a crow call. My hair stood up on the back of my neck and my dad retreated into the house. He slammed the big door and locked it, something I had never seen him do. Before I could ask a question, he said, "It isn't safe. We can go tomorrow morning." And so we did. But the rest of the night, we stayed inside. My dad didn't even go outside to smoke a cigarette. He even let the outside dog stay in the house. We never talked about that again, but that was one of the scariest moments of my life. This happened 7 years back. I was living in a rented house where we had 2 bathrooms. One of them was broken and unusable. It smells really bad when you open the bathroom door. I always have this one bolted and locked. One night, a thunderstorm was approaching the city. The power went off since the winds were too strong. I was there sitting all alone in the living room when I heard thudding sound coming from the bathroom. I thought it could be because of the air pressure difference due to the thunderstorm. Continued on to do my assignments. And there was a loud thud, and I swear I saw the bathroom door open. I freaked out and left the house and stayed at the terrace until the power came. I don't know where the lock went and how the fuck it opened. When I went back in, the door was partly closed. Locked it tight and tied it with a rope. Obviously I chickened out of that house in a couple of weeks. Never going near there again. A few years ago, I delivered newspapers in a rural area. It was a peaceful route for the most part. I'd drive for a few miles, stop at the one house, continue down the road a few more miles, and so on. I honestly liked it most of the time, just not in the winter when we had entirely too much snow. The only thing that really got to me was the cougar. I could tell the nights he was out hunting. All my big herds of deer and my giant flocks of turkeys would just vanish. All the birds would stop and the normal night sounds were just gone. If I stopped in a place too long, I freaked out, but nothing was creepier than the night where I pulled over by some train tracks to grab some stuff from my backseat. I didn't get out of the car, just sort of twisted in my seat, perk of being short. Turned around and there's a very large cat just looking at me through the front window. I might have basically taken off in my car going about 80 miles per hour. But the worst part? A couple of hours later and several miles away, I was finishing up the route. And there's the cougar watching me from some trees. Not sure which was a more terrifying thought, the cougar was following me or that there could potentially be more than one of them. My friends bought a huge chunk of property in southern Colorado in the San Luis Valley. I went out for a month to clear 10 acres of forest for greenhouses to be built. I was there by myself the entire time and had to stay in a tent because there was no infrastructure yet. One night I was sitting on the edge of this overlook before bed and the entire canyon below me lit up with a huge flash of light and then was gone immediately. I was kind of freaked out, but got over it and just went to bed. A few days later I was talking to a rancher a couple miles down the road and he said the morning after the night of the flash he found 3 of his cows in that canyon with all the blood drained out of their bodies and their eyes and some of their organs were removed. There weren't any tire tracks or any sign of struggle whatsoever near the cows. And let me tell you, this property was in the middle of nowhere. Needless to say I was pretty freaked out the rest of my time out there. Lots of weird shit like that was going and the entire area just had a very weird vibe. I'm normally a very pragmatic person and not interested in the supernatural at all, but after my time in the San Luis Valley, I'm not so sure anymore. Traveling through the outback in Australia. Literally the middle of the desert. My GF and I pulled over at a random point along the road to roll out the swag and sleep before we keep driving. Can't drive at night in the desert. Woke up to a guy standing over the swag. We shat bricks. Long story short, French backpacker's car broke down, no reception, ran out of food and water the day prior. For some reason he tucked his car away in the shrubs. He spoke little English. My GF at the time, also a backpacker from Europe, spoke French and was able to figure out his story. His car broke down, shitty Ford Festiva not made for the outback, and had been there for days. We gave him a 20 liters jerrycan of water and a bunch of tinned food. He refused to leave his car despite explaining to him there's no way that car is leaving where it is. We drove until we got reception, called local police. We told them what happened. We told them how far we drove to where we were, checked speedometer before we left him and when we got reception, so they could figure out where he is. We gave all our details to the police but never heard back from them. We hoped he was okay and assumed no news is good news. Still though, we'll never forget the feeling of a man standing over my swag in the middle of the desert when I woke up. I'm a long-haul truck driver. I used to run from Midwest to West Coast. On my way back to the Midwest from LA I would run at night. Easier that way, not as much traffic. Well, 6 or 7 hours into my trip in Utah, really can't remember the city name, but I was on I-15 getting on I-70 heading towards the Rockies. Now if any of you have traveled especially by car, bus, or train, you know you can see the night sky and almost all it starts clearly. I remember I passed my favorite truck stop for a quick lunch. As I'm driving, my XM goes a little haywire. Even though I just got it professionally installed. I'm thinking great, got ripped off. Then I look up and I see a light. I'm thinking to myself, I'd where that plane is going. I've been up and down these roads a while now. So I'm thinking, did they build a new airport in this direction? Now I've been driving for a bit after my lunch and I realized I'm coming up to an area that is completely empty, isolated, nothing for hundreds of miles in any direction, and I still see this light. I look down at my clock. I have driven 3 hours from when I last stopped. I remember 2 of those hours. So I pull off the interstate and look at my dash cam. Everything from when I stopped to when I pulled over was recorded. I look up and the light. Literally the light also stopped moving and just hooved over me. I jumped into my truck, busted a U-turn on the highway and raced back to my favorite truck stop, called my dispatch, told him duck Trader Joe's and its food. I ain't moving till I see sunlight. I hung up, locked my doors, shut my curtains and went to bed. Next morning, I look over my body, look over everything on my truck, even the damn fuel, and I find nothing wrong or anything new to it or me. To this day I refuse to go past the Rockies. I tell my dispatch, take the tip of Nebraska of the west side of it and draw a line from north to south. That's is my cutoff to take my up to. To this day I can't remember that 1 hour, and that damn light even followed me almost to the truck stop. I lost about 5 miles before I pulled in for the night. Sorry about my spelling and grammar on mobile and just woke up. Any questions are welcome. I was about 15 and was in Costa Rica for the summer, as I have a lot of family out there. It's a big family and most everyone lives in the city, but we had this house in the deep country a few km outside a tiny town called San Pedro. It was mountainous and with thick jungle forests. A serene place really. Old little house with some hand-constructed pools and decks up the hill. There was power and water and it was enough for a relaxing getaway. It was up in the mountains surrounded by jungle and some random ranchland and farmland. It was honestly the most beautiful place I've ever been. But, given its isolation, it could end up being a little creepy, especially after dark. You'd see lights in the forest when there shouldn't have been, and sometimes you would see weird shit in the sky. When under the tree canopy, it got dark fast and all kinds of things would come out and make noise. Noise in the jungle at night is honestly pretty normal, but one particular night we had a weird one. It was myself, my abuela, my tia and tío and my cousin. We were all settled in bed, reading as we didn't have any internet out there and smartphones were a new thing. It was actually almost dead quiet that night, more of an anomaly really. It was a sudden scream that broke the silence, and not just any scream, it was somewhat human and absolutely blood-curdling. Like a woman mixed with a cat, vile and terrifying. It started pretty much right outside the house and traveled all the way up to the pool area, a good distance, still very loud. Meanwhile, as it moved up somewhat quickly, there was this thunderous sound of what sounded like a dozen horses in full gallop moving with the screaming thing. It got up past the pool into a field behind it all the way up to the river. A good minute of horror. Needless to say, we were all shaken a good bit. My little cousin, who was like 10 or something, was unable to sleep again that night. Oddly enough, once everything had settled, the jungle carried on like usual. Bugs chittering and whatnot. The following morning we went to look, and sure about tons of hoof prints. A local farmer said his horses had escaped, but that doesn't much explain the screaming. My abuela told me it must have been la bruja, or a witch. People out there believe in such legends. Elves and fairies. But in remote jungle countryside, who knows what lies within. Anyways, that's my little tale. I can't take credit for this story because it happened to my younger brother, but it is such a creepy story that he still doesn't like to talk about it. My twin brother and I were in college when my younger brother was a junior in high school, and he was the only brother left on one end of the house. We live out in the country in the middle of nowhere. Nothing but farmland wherever you look. Our house was a standard long rectangular house, with our parents' master suite on one end, and our bedrooms on the completely opposite end. Between these ends were open concept kitchen, dining, and living room spaces. You could look from one end of the house and see all the way to the other end if both bedrooms on each end were open. My brother, a big guy, 6'4" plus 250 pounds, was getting home from football practice around 4:30 to 5 p.m. and said he was the only one home at the time. Our mom is a school teacher and our dad farms and works in town as well. Our parents were still working at the time. He came into the house in the back door and was walking through the living room to head to his bedroom. His bedroom was the room at the end of our hallway, completely opposite from our parents' master suite. Maybe if I do a good job describing our end of the house, I can help explain what happens later. Right as you are leaving the living room to enter our hallway and bedrooms, there are 4 doors. First door on the right was my bedroom, and completely opposite my bedroom is our shared bathroom for us 3 brothers. As you walk down the hallway, the second door on your left is my twin brother's room, and my younger brother has his room at the end of the hallway. My younger brother's room has a small area you walk and then you immediately walk to your right to enter the main part of his bedroom. So if his bedroom door is open, all you see, if you are in the hallway, is a small entrance facing a wall with light coming in from the open bedroom space on the right. Back to the story. As my brother is walking through the living room and about to enter the hallway, he looks down the hallway to his open bedroom door. He explained that he didn't know why, but he had the deepest pit in his stomach and felt every single hair on his arms stand on end. Something felt wrong to him and he froze as he entered the hallway. Once he got into the hallway and was looking at his bedroom door, he said he saw something beginning to peer around the doorway. He knew exactly what it was, and the only way he could describe it was, it looked like my forehead was peering around the doorframe getting ready to look right at me. He instantly got the sensation that he didn't need to see what was fixing to show up all the way peering around his door, so he immediately bolted to the left for our bathroom and slammed the door. He said he held his back up against the door and immediately heard someone running down our hallway, past the bathroom into our living room. The worst part was when he could hear him slowly walking back to the bathroom door and just stand there. We get absolutely terrible cell reception where we live, so he tried calling our parents but couldn't get a hold of either of them. He stayed in our bathroom with his back up against the door for about an hour until our mom made it home. He says until she got there he could tell someone was on the other side of that door. When he told us about this story, we just laughed and said maybe it was your doppelgänger coming to get you, and he absolutely believes it was something like that. He was so scared during the moment, he said, and he just knew I was not supposed to see what was coming around the door. He's still scared to stay alone at that end of the house, and now he's 27. A few years back when I was unhoused, I would sleep pretty much wherever I could, and have some wild stories to tell about that, but that's a whole different game. One time I was in a pretty forested inner city park sleeping with my so. We had actually just got done hooking up when we noticed a man in a hoodie standing about 20 away. I addressed him and asked what he wanted, but he didn't respond, and just continued to stare silently at us. It was like 2 a.m. and felt super threatening and ominous. At this point in my life I pretty much always slept with a knife under my makeshift pillow, and for good reason. I low-key grabbed my knife and continued to ask what he wanted, and demanded he leave. After a few minutes he silently walked about 100 yards away and sat under a tree. This may sound crazy to some, but this was enough to allow us to fall back asleep. The next night I was in the park camping by myself, and had actually just smoked weed, which I rarely did at the time. I was listening to some black metal with headphones when I suddenly got the feeling like I was being watched. I looked up and saw the same hooded man, again about 20 away. This time I grabbed my knife right away and jumped onto my feet and asked him what the duck he wanted. He remained silent and still for what felt like a really long time, and then suddenly and quickly starting taking steps towards me. I was fully prepared to either die or bleed this sketchy ducker out. I'm not saying that to sound tough or anything, it legit felt like life or death. Keep in mind I'm holding my knife here, so this dude is either very confident in what he is doing, or batshit insane. After a few strides towards me he just stops and stares again, and then turns around and walks out of the park. I was so shook I almost immediately just broke down and cried. I never even saw the guy's face, he was just a figure dressed in black, and behaved nothing like I would expect any human creature to. It was ducked. I hated it. I'm housed now and still won't duck with that park. Being homeless sucks. I was walking in Richmond Park, in London, which is rather famous for its deer. I went for a walk on what I thought, at the time, was a fairly well-used path. Well, while it would have been a well-used path in most woodlands, but Richmond Park, being one of the main parks in London, has very clearly designated paths for most visitors, it would seem. I started going up the hill up this path thinking it would be a through route, almost, to another path I wanted to access, and along the way, I noticed some deer tracks. If it had occurred to me just how fresh these deer tracks might be, I might have turned back. While road deer are manageable, as they are throughout the UK, the deer in Richmond Park are a whole other thing, particularly during the rutting season. This was not the rutting season. I go up the path, happy as Larry, when I turn a corner and walk past a big tree. Just as I come out from behind the big tree, only a few yards away, standing above me further up the hill, is a massive red deer stag, in its prime, staring at me as if to say, "What do you think you're doing here?" Naturally, I was very surprised. If I'd encountered a deer, I would have at least expected a female, possibly bounding away in front of me, but to be faced by a potentially aggressive red deer stag, facing me directly and standing in an imposing position above me, was frankly terrifying, especially as I was on my own. Literally the first thing I did when I processed what was happening was to turn around and very slowly and carefully walk back down the hill towards the main path. Luckily, the stag didn't follow me. In retrospect, I honestly don't think he was expecting a person up there, hence the surprised look, so he probably wasn't that much of a threat, but they are big, potentially dangerous animals when they're in a bad mood, that's for sure. This happened in a small town of Gentryville, Indiana, a small town of 260-something. But before I proceed, I'm not one for believing ghosts or creatures, I feel people are scary enough. This night really challenged my beliefs. My friend invited me to a camping trip, and I was happy to agree as I jump at any camping opportunity. I got the directions and traveled to Gentryville. We ended up camping just off the main road a ways behind a small white generic church. The day was business as normal. We built a fire and had a few drinks. Fast forward a later into the night, nature was calling me. I made it known to my friends that I was heading up the road to pee. I walk up the dirt road a bit to get some privacy. The spot I chose was that I could still see the fire and my friends, but slightly in the dark. The moon was very bright that night, providing a soft light on the trees. There I saw it, standing not 12 ft from me. The best I can compare it to is a gray alien. I know how it sounds, but it was what it was. This wasn't the cliché gray you see in shows or movies. It was 6 feet something. It wore this metallic transparent or reflective material that wore straight and pressed. It was standing very still, and combined with the clothing, I guess I didn't notice it almost perfectly blending into the tree line. The only thing that moved was its face, making very aggressive, disapproving looks that I noticed it. The face was gray and wrinkled like an older person, mostly around the eyes and mouth. Its mouth came to a point downward with a small opening. The eyes were large, sunken into its head a bit. No sounds were made. Just us staring at each other. I was locked in place with fear. I'm not sure why, but the fear went away as quick as it came. I finished up and turned my back to it and walked away. It was a peaceful walk back, but as soon as I sat down the fear rushed back. It was like the whole encounter had been temporarily forgotten and everything was normal. I told my friend that lived in the area that I saw something up the road and it kind of scared me. I purposely kept the details vague, so not to sound crazy. I settled on telling them I think someone is in the tree line. My friend, without skipping a beat, asked me, was it gray? My stomach dropped. I told him yes, and I asked why he would ask me such a thing. He explained one night he was working on something at his house in the driveway in the woods, and one took a run at him and tried to attack, fleeing back into the woods. Will never forget the range of feelings that went through my head while locked in its stare. The whole event has left me kind of scared to camp or be alone in the woods. Two very creepy things happened to me in the same stretch of woods about a half-mile apart from each other. A few weeks ago a buddy and I heard about this private man-made lake that you could bike to. So we park at this school and walk through the woods around this huge gate and bike about a mile on this dirt path. Upon getting to the lake, out of the corner of my eye I see a tree limb about the size of a car hit the ground about 300 feet away from us. I watch the tree line right where it happened, and then I see two pine trees start shaking aggressively, almost as if they were twigs. Fear rushed through my body as I watched this go on for about 30 seconds. Once I was able to speak again, I start to tell my friend what happened. As I'm explaining it to him, we hear what sounded like a plane engine start up on the other side of the lake, then the noise shifted to a violent roar that sent chills down my spine. My friend looked at me and we decided to get the hell out of there. The second one happened a week ago on a different dirt road not too far from there. Me and the other friends were walking on the road at 11 p.m., a quarter mile, and we find two coolers. One was filled with old books dating back to slave years. The other cooler was closed and read severed head inside with a skull drawn on. We opened it, but it was filled with only water. We were very creeped out, so we decided to jog back. As we were jogging, we hear really loud metal banging sounds and what sounded like humans trying to mimic animals. Once hearing that, our jog turned into a full-on sprint. This sounds stupid, but we're planning a camping trip in those woods soon, so wish us luck. I'm in a power wheelchair. Can't stand up, much less walk. Took a family vacation to Washington, D.C. several years back. The wheelchair I had at the time was a piece of shit that would not carry a charge long enough to last a single day, so almost every night the wife and kids would be pushing me and my chair back to the hotel. Knowing this, we had planned to go see one of the sites at night, the Lincoln Memorial, I think. So, that afternoon we stayed at the hotel with my chair plugged in to get as much charge as possible and maybe make the trip without killing everyone. We see our sights and go to head back to the subway/metro/whatever it's called, only to learn that certain stops, including the one nearest our hotel, closed at a certain time of night. We are well past that time, so we find the next nearest open stop and decide to get off there and hope we make it back alive. The train stops, and at this particular stop the cars and the platform didn't match up quite right. There was a gap about 4 to 6 inches and a step up off of the car a couple inches as well. My chair, being as shitty as it was, would not make that gap going forward, so I turned backwards to give it a shot. I'm not quite sure how, but the back casters of my chair got turned sideways and fell down into the gap between the cars and the platform. I was effectively stuck and couldn't move. Suddenly my chair begins to violently rock back and forth, tossing me around pretty roughly. Thinking it was my wife, I start to turn around to tell her to chill a little bit because she was beating me to death. As my head turns, I see my wife and all 4 of my kids standing a few feet away, staring in horror at me. Now sort of scared myself, I turn around to see a homeless dude with both hands on my chair, shaking the shit out of it. I start to say something, but just as my mouth opened, he succeeded in getting my chair out of the gap and onto the platform. I was so surprised that I kind of just stared for a second. He didn't say anything, just turned and drunkenly shambles away. Finally coming to reality, I called out, "Thank you." He didn't answer or even turn around. He just silently raised his hand to acknowledge my thank you and disappeared into the night. He damn near broke my ribs slamming my body into the arms of my chair, but he got me out of there. We still joke about the drunk guardian angel of DC. My boyfriend and I were backpacking through rural Tasmania a few years ago. While on a bus, we were discussing our plans for the ensuing 2 weeks. The girl in the seat in front turns around and offers us a place to stay in her town. We declined as we were headed elsewhere first, but she gave us her mobile number and said that she and her partner would love to have us. A few days later we decide to take them up on their offer. We call her, and she says they're happy to host us. So far so good. They meet us at the train station and immediately something feels off. It's really difficult to explain, but it's that primal, ineffable feeling in your guts that tells you that something isn't right. We ignored our guts and followed them. They lead us straight out of town. We ask them where we're going and they say that they live on the outskirts. This town is creepy as duck. It's an old mining town that has been largely abandoned, and as we walk the 15-odd minutes to their home the houses get shittier, with boarded up windows, overgrown gardens and no people in sight. Eventually we reach the house at the very end of the town. It's their house. We go in. Set up in the middle of the living room is a single mattress with a sheet hanging around it. They show us around the house except for one door which stays closed. When I asked what was behind it, they pretended not to hear. Our room has a made bed, chest of drawers, and looks like a normal room. It seems weird that they sleep on mattresses in the living room when they have a guest room. We go back into the living room and look around. Knives. A lot of knives. My boyfriend asks if they go hunting? No. The partner hands one of the knives to my boyfriend and asks him to open it. It's a massive ducking Bowie knife with what looks like blood staining around the edges of the blade. My boyfriend laughs awkwardly and sets it down. They have a tattoo gun, to practice. My boyfriend asks if they have any tattoos. No. There's a small axe at the door. I ask if they collect wood. No. Suddenly the guy says he wants to go to the shops. We agree quickly because we're creeped out and want to get back into the town. The four of us leave and they start walking in the opposite direction to the town. I say that the town is back the other way. The guy says this way would be more interesting because it goes up through the trees. He says that they have never been up the mountain before, but he knows the area and it would take the same amount of time. I tell my boyfriend that I'm freaking out, but he thinks it's okay. We follow them into the trees. The path goes up the mountain. We are going in the total opposite direction of the town. The girl turns around to her partner and whispers, "So where was the place again?" My boyfriend and I freeze. I say I want to take the road back to town and start walking. When the four of us arrive in the one shop in town, no one recognizes the couple. And this is a really small town. We make an excuse that we want to go look at sights and that we'll catch up with them later, and instead book a hotel room and freak out. I did some snooping on the area. Their house had an extra room, behind the mystery door, and a basement. The path that we were taking led straight out of town and up the mountain. There was no way it could loop back into town. So yeah, pretty sure we narrowly avoided being murdered. Or maybe they were just massive weirdos. TBH, the creepiest thing was the fact that there was no drug paraphernalia at all. The state of the house and the weird behavior would have been understandable if they were intoxicated, but that wasn't the case. In southwest GA in the dense hardwoods around 8 miles out of the town of Doppelgänger, I had a pretty disturbing encounter. I was around 16 years old 5 years ago. My dad and I went hunting. We always climbed different trees anywhere from 1 mile to 4 miles apart. We did this so that maybe if we startled any deer they'd wander towards the other hunter. Anyway, as I was climbing the tree with my tree lounge, I heard something below me, round 12 feet down at this point, about 30 yards out, sounded like twigs cracking. So I stop and look behind me, to see just the dense woods. Figure it's a small critter, squirrel or some such. About half an hour later I'm settled in my tree and the sun is starting to peek through the leaves. It's no longer in the twilight of dawn, it's becoming morning. As I'm sitting in my comfiest stand, I notice a palmetto bush. Normally this isn't anything odd, but the fact that I noticed it threw me off. Why did I notice it? I sat and stared and couldn't figure out what it was that caught my eye. A palmetto bush looks like the top of a palm tree that sits on the ground, and has a few sort of hairs/tails that stick up and produce some pretty tasty berries. Well, I couldn't figure it out, so I keep scanning the area. A couple hours passed and I keep noticing this damn bush. Why? Why is it so spectacular all of a sudden? It's a bush, damn it. A normal palmetto bush. Whatever, I kept on hunting for these deer. Around 11 a.m. my pa rings me on the pager, says he wants to walk to what we call the honey hole. A good hunting location full of deer around this time. Has a little stream, plenty of cover for them, and plenty of sneaky passages for us. Okay pa, I'll meet you there. As I begin packing up, I notice twigs snapping again. It came from the bush. So I look. And I figured out what it was that stood out so damn much. There was a MF man staring at me through the bush. He had a scraggly beard, a tan coat, and some jumper suit pants on. He had a hood up that was the color of the bush. Not only that, he had covered his face in mud. A common hunting camouflage technique. Noticing this, I grabbed my Remington 700, and point it towards the ground near the man. Soon as I did this he let out a terrifying cackle and darted towards the direction of a creek about 150 yards away from my tree. I watched him through my scope. I could hear him and see him cackling the whole way. And the scariest part? He leapt across a creek that's about 9 feet wide. In a single fooing jump. Now where he leapt it might have been only 5 or 6 feet wide, but even then. I wasn't as scared as I was disturbed. I had a rifle, a damn good one too. 6-round capacity, bolt action. I have never missed a shot on any animal with my rifle, so I felt safe and confident in my skills and equipment. But even then, it was strange as all hell. The land was a public hunting club's land, which is why I didn't shoot him. I got down and continued to the honey hole, where I told Pa about the situation. Anyhow, we kept hunting that location in the future after the incident, Never saw him again. Told the club about him and nobody had heard of anything like it. But about 3 months later he was spotted by someone else who also used tree climber stands. They said they had been hunting a specific hunting site in a certain tree for a couple days at the time. One morning at dawn they climbed into the tree, and after getting settled in they saw something level out the corner of their eye. When they looked, it was the same description of the man I saw, but he was in an adjacent tree hanging upside down like a sloth, staring at them. Note this is about 20 feet up. When they spotted him and threatened to shoot him, he cackled and climbed down the tree very quickly, in a matter of a few seconds. He dashed off into the planted pines behind the guy, and that was the last I've heard of the weirdo. So yeah, long story but disturbing as all hell.